Rule 42. All persons more than a mile high must leave the court immediately.
1, 2, 3, 42.
Today's rule is rule number 19. The only way out of it is through it.
Hi, Melissa. I'm Audrey. So sorry about that. And my malfunctions, they happen, man.
I've been a life, right?
You've dealt with the life cycle of excuses a million times over in your profession.
Also, I always think Wednesdays are just Wednesdays are those days where everything tends to sort of go sideways for me. So I get it.
Most days go sideways for me, but I just upright them at some point. They're called rabbit holes. You just got to pick and choose which one you go down and stay down.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Well said. I like that.
So the teaching industry, this is so interesting that you went from the teaching industry into law. Was this driven by your son?
Yeah. So I was in education for 20 years. I was a teacher and then an assistant principal and a principal and central office. But when I was a teacher, my son Ryan, who will be 28 next month, was diagnosed with profound autism and an intellectual disability. And at the time, so this is almost 25 years ago, at the time, internet was just exploding. Like the profile of autism was not public yet. Facebook wasn't a thing. Autism Speaks wasn't a thing. So it was sort of very isolating. I was in this, so even though I was a teacher, I really didn't know how to find services for my son, get programming for him. I didn't understand the process, the law. I had no clue. And I was and also he's severe, and that manifested in significant behaviors. And so I was just in survival mode and trying to figure it all out.
Well, it was all new. There were no standards in place. There wasn't any of that. You were chartering a world that didn't exist at the time.
Exactly. And truthfully, I had no experience with this world. When we were all in school, right? So Tommy and I grew up together, right? When we were in school, and I know him as Tommy, so I'm going to say that. I'm sorry. But when we were in school, special education was removed, right? It was in a room in
the room in the back, that's only for people would go to.
For the special kids.
Yeah.
Right. And so there was not this inclusion model where, and again, we're in a very different place today, but still have a long way to go. But I didn't have exposure. So I was really trying to navigate a system that became too overwhelming for me. And someone suggested to me when Ryan was 4 years old, you should hire a lawyer. You should hire a special education lawyer. And I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even.
Especially back then.
Yeah. And so I hired, my attorney for Ryan when he was just 5 years old. And I will tell you, Ryan's going to be 28 next month. And my attorney for Ryan literally changed our life. He changed the entire trajectory of Ryan's education, his programming, his services, his whole future because of the advocacy that he did on behalf of Ryan at a time when kids, were not getting outplaced very often, never mind out of state. My son, it was so severe, he actually required a residential placement. And there was nothing in Connecticut that could handle him. So we had to actually place him out of state. All of that happened because of my attorney, who's now my colleague. And he said to me back then, even though I was a teacher, you should be doing this work. You are the exact right person to be doing this work. And I sort of, I checked that and put it away and went through a career in education. But every so often he would say, when are you going to law school? When are you going to law school?
Yeah.
And so when I was a principal, I was a principal at a school in Hartford. It was a public magnet school. We had, probably about 30 different towns represented in the school. And we had, so I was working with special education teams from about 13 different towns. And it was then that I really saw how pervasive the issue is, that parents who had an attorney got what their kids were entitled to, and parents who didn't. And so, right. And so I remember sitting in these meetings are called PPT meetings, planning and placement team meetings in Connecticut. Everywhere else in the country, they call them IEP meetings.
Yeah.
Individual education program meetings. So that's everywhere else in the country. Connecticut, we call it something different. And I remember sitting at a PPT meeting for a student, and I was the principal, and I was sort of acting like that kid's lawyer at the meeting. And I was advocating for what I really believed, that child needed. And so the directors from these towns used to complain about me because when I asked for services, it cost the town money, right? And so I remember after that meeting, my superintendent at the time, who I loved, called me down and said, I understand and appreciate what you're doing, but that's not really your role at that table. And I thought, she's right. And it was nothing as dramatic as like, in the moment I resigned and ran to law school. It wasn't like that. I know that would be a better. I resigned at the end of that year. And
that's still pretty quick.
And still pretty quick. And I will say, Andy, my attorney for my son, wrote my recommendation to get into law school.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I was actually able to, he was presented with a really prestigious award in Greenwich a few months ago, and I was able to, they asked me to introduce him, and I was able to tell our story, and it was, it was like a nice full circle moment, because it's really hard to ever thank someone who's done that for your life. Ryan now lives in a group home about 20 minutes from me, and goes to a day program and is really living a life that I never thought was possible for him. Because of the program and the services that he received. And so I sort of went to law school with the mission of being someone's Andy. Andy's my attorney. Like, I want to be Andy for other families.
That's amazing, because a lot of people do need someone like that, have their back and kind of know what's going on in the system to help them through it.
They don't know, because they don't know that things like this are put into place. People without money don't realize that there are places that they can look towards for their children to get help that are in these positions. Like, I have a daughter on the spectrum that was in a public school, and if it wasn't for a teacher fighting and advocating for her, she would have been put into a school that would not have been what was best for her. And that's how I found out about student advocacy attorneys and that the child has rights. Forget about us, our rights as parents. The children have their own rights.
Well, you hold them as the parents. So yeah. Special education law is governed by a federal law called the IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And so under that law, right, there are rights that belong to the child that has special needs, that has an IEP, but the parents hold those rights until the child turns 18. And once the child turns 18, those rights will automatically transfer back to the child unless you put something in place like an education power of attorney or a conservatorship or a guardianship. But a lot of parents don't understand their rights. I have an Instagram page where I just do videos, and they're short and they're not polished and they're not professional at all. But all they are just tips for parents, and on TikTok also, just quick tips, because there's so much basic information that that parents really should know and don't know. And so part of what we try to do at our law firm is completely focused on advocating for families that have kids with special needs. I mean, that's pretty much all we do. in a variety of contexts, but our whole focus is making sure that kids are getting the programming and the services that they're entitled to, and that we're educating families at the same time of their legal rights.
I just want to ask something, Melissa, because you mentioned or someone mentioned that people with money tend to have access to lawyers and get their kids in the right situation. But how much, and I've noticed this with my own kids, there's so much pushback because they don't want to send the kid out of district because it costs so much money. But what would you say to someone who doesn't have access to a lawyer or doesn't have that kind of money? Like, how could they essentially fight the system to get their kid what they need?
Yeah, I mean, it's so while special education is governed by federal law, states have their own statutes which are really mimic the IDEA. And in terms of outplacement and access to support, every state has some sort of a legal aid, legal counseling a system for families. So in Connecticut, we have something called CPAC, CPAC. And so it's an advocacy center for families, and people can call in with questions and get some support. As you can imagine, those tend to be, the wait lists can be long. They tend to be over and inundated with questions. So, but the other thing is there's a lot of information online. So I always recommend to people, no matter what state you live in, go online to Rights Law, WRIGHTSLAW. It's such a great resource. It's put together by Peter Wright, who's an attorney who argued at the United States Supreme Court a special education case regarding reimbursement for funding for private placements, and won. And he and his wife have put together, and the site is just filled with resources for families to access that, you can type in questions and probably your question has been asked before. And then the other place I like to guide families towards is COPA.org, COPAA.org. And that's Council of Parent Advocates and Attorneys. So it's the national organization for parents, advocates, and attorneys that do this work. And we come together once a year and have a conference. And it's COPA that when there is a special education law issue case at the United States Supreme Court, COPA is the one that will provide like an amicus brief in support of whatever it is that we're advocating or that we're fighting for. And COPA, the parent portal, has a wealth of resources, including by state vetted special education attorneys and advocates and agencies that can provide support for families.
So are these just for people with special education issues, or is there somewhere where people who don't have a child in special education could go to kind of get help with issues that they're having in the schools?
Right. So COPA and Rights Law are very focused on special education, and also Rights Law in particular has a very active 504 section. Okay. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that's a separate federal law. It's not special education, and it's not just for kids. It's for everyone. It's basically an anti-discrimination law, but the way it presents in schools is you have to have access to the same programs and services. Okay. Kids who are not disabled, and some kids require what's called a 504 plan. And what all that means is they require some modifications and accommodations to access what their peers are accessing, but it's not special education. It gets confusing because you can get some special education services under a 504 plan.
Yeah.
But they're very heavy on those. So in terms of, quote unquote, issues that you're having with schools in general, I don't know what specifically you might be referring to.
So I'm kind of referring to, I'm having an issue with my daughter in school where she's missed many days, well over the allotted absence that they give, right?
So you got the letter.
I think we've all gotten a letter, all three of us.
Yeah. So we always get the letter. We get the letter, and we've gone to the appeals board to appeal it, and she's missed a lot of days because she has gastric issues. We're trying to figure out. She vomits every day, and it's kind of been an ongoing medical. So we've been trying to deal with different things with the doctors and medications, but she's missing days. Like, she missed a lot of days. So we tried to appeal it, and I just got email back from the school to this morning, actually, saying that it's not approved, that she has lost credit in pretty much all of her classes. So her junior year is now a wash. And they either are going to, they said she could take 2 classes in summer school, but our school doesn't offer summer school. So we would have to go out of district and pay for it. Or they said that they could just kind of like overload her schedule next year, and her senior year, she'll just be going to school with like a crazy schedule, which I don't think is right either, because now you're going to stress out the kid that's already stressed out. Like, so I was just trying to see what other avenues there are to kind of.
So your daughter is a prime example of a student who would be potentially eligible for a 504 plan. Because 504 plans are put in place for kids who sometimes have medical issues that are impacting their ability to access their education. And so therefore they need certain accommodations in order to access school. And so, and again, I have to disclaim, this is not legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. But if it were my kid, what I would do is I would have all my documentation from my doctor, and I would call an immediate 504 meeting, and I would present your daughter to the 504 team and indicate, and have your doctor, I would have my doctor potentially write a note that indicates she requires these accommodations. And those accommodations can sometimes mean a late start to school or virtual learning options for students who have some medical conditions that get in the way of kids being able to do school. She might need extra time on assignments and projects. And so if she's not in school and she's missing since she can't get caught up, she may require an accommodation of extra time to accommodate this medical issue. And so she is a prime example of a student who could be eligible for a 504 plan, because what they're doing potentially by just, failing and calling the year a wash is discriminating against her based on her medical condition, which is, could be classified as a disability. So that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
With my daughter, who I mentioned before we started talking, she has social anxiety disorder. She has NVLD. Well, you're probably one of the people who knows what that is.
Nonverbal learning disorder.
Yes. So, but she's a performer. She has no problem on stage, but she has lots of anxiety. So we got the letter in October. So she'd already missed like 20 classes a month in. But in our case, we had the meeting, we did the appeal, but in our case, the school was great. They said, listen, we know this doesn't work for her. Let's figure something out. And they almost did like an independent study program where she's taking some classes in special services, but also going to general classes for like theater and music and gym. So I think we're very lucky that they were able to work that out. And we don't know if that's going to continue next year, but that, I think we're a case, and I don't want people to get disheartened, but that sometimes schools do work with you and they do help, your kids when they need.
Absolutely. Is your daughter on an IEP, Tom?
No, not at all. She's on an IEP. Absolutely. Yes.
Right. So she has some protections that Jen's daughter doesn't have.
Yeah.
Because she's on an IEP, they are legally required to meet her where she is and sort of do it. And I'm glad they are, because even with that, some schools just don't do that. Not just in Connecticut or New Jersey, and across the country, and some do, and some are wonderful. For sure. I think my perspective in this world is a little unique because I've literally been at every seat at that table, right? I've been the parent advocating for my kid. I've been the school district. I've been the teacher. I've been, and now I'm the attorney. And so I never, do these interviews or promote, sort of district bashing. That's never what I set out to do. My approach is, really to try to be collaborative And I try to encourage clients to be collaborative with your school district, because I think you get further with that approach. And even when attorneys are involved, there are, many board attorneys that, are very collaborative and are problem solvers and are willing to roll up their sleeves and try to figure stuff out. So I'm not surprised to hear, Tom, that, your school district did the right thing, but they were also legally required to put a program in that made it so that she could access her education, because the IEP, what people don't realize is that's a contract. That's a contract between the family and the school district. Like, this is what we're saying, and it has everything on it that the district is held accountable for. And so when there's, something goes sideways, which happens all the time for whatever reason, they have to pivot. And I'm glad that they did in your case. So in Jen's case, you don't have that protection.
No, this is all kind of new. So this just started last summer. She started with the gastric issues and the vomiting. So it's all kind of, we're kind of working with it as it goes, because we don't really know what's wrong with her yet. So it's different doctors, and it's been a long road, but it's just a little disconcerting that the school isn't really, we did have a meeting with the whole school and everything. And I thought that we were getting somewhere, but it obviously not.
Yeah, so you have to look up who the 504 coordinator is at your school, and that would be the person that you reach out to and copy the school principal and request an actual 504 meeting.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. Well, this is today is the last official day of school, so we'll have to work on that over the summer and hopefully see what we can kind of come. But I really appreciate all this information that you gave me, because now I feel like I'm going in like kind of knowing what I'm talking about.
Jen was furiously writing down all those websites.
Oh, I was writing. I got my whole my notebook.
But Melissa, also one thing you mentioned, the IEP, and that is a contract, and people, I think these are human beings, parents, teachers, educators, whatever, and they forget that the provisions there exist. I mean, teachers have lots of kids, so they'll say, "Hey, why aren't you sitting in the front row like it says in your IEP?" And the teacher just forgets, whatever the case is. And I think it's also on parents to be on top of that and to reinforce that, as hard as that could be sometimes. Because you have to advocate for your kids. You just have to. And they have to advocate for themselves.
Well, I think part of the issue, Tom, with an IEP is that it's a lot of the work that I do is just walking my clients through it, because it's a daunting document. It's, in some cases, it can be 20 pages long. And it's filled with language that if you're in education and you understand it, but if you're not, it can be like reading a document in a completely different language. And it was created because of a meeting, a PPT or an IEP meeting that you had, where you're sitting around a table with 12 to 15 people who are talking about your child, right? And so I know that for myself, before I hired Andy, I could not sit at that meeting and function. I needed somebody to be my brain, because I'm all heart when I'm talking about my kids, right? And so now you have parents who've gone through that meeting, and even when it's a collaborative, it's still an overwhelming process. Now they get a document that's 20 pages long that they don't understand. And a lot of families don't feel comfortable reaching out to say, "Hey, can you walk me through this so that I'm understanding what services my child is getting, what accommodations, the goals and objectives, do they make sense?" And so, to your point, it is really important that parents are well versed in their child's IEP, and if that means that they need support and in understanding what exactly is supposed to be happening, then they need to reach out and ask the school team for support around that, because by the time a parent calls me, something terrible has happened, right? So the trust has broken down, the system has broken down, and their claims that the IEP isn't being followed, are sometimes justifiable and sometimes they aren't. So as the lawyer, what we have to do is, school districts' obligations are to provide a free and appropriate public education.
So my question is, just because I come from a different type of background in terms of we're not taught any of this. My education came because I was adopted and they encouraged me. I mean, look, my biological parents encouraged me with my education, but it wasn't something that my parents were like super involved in. So for those parents that like, for those kids that don't have those like active parents, it's important to have those teachers that are supportive like you. And that's why they thought that you were such a good fit for this, because you are somebody that's advocating not just for your own child, but you're so passionate about it that you're finding paths for other people. And in that thought line with these other people, there are people that do not speak English. And you provided some websites and resources, but are those resources available across the board, or are they only in English? Do they have translators?
Yeah. So yes, and both Rights Law and COPA have, have different tracks for, families who English is a second language. I know that predominantly an issue, a trend that we see across the country is kids who have English as a second language are over-identified as special education students, when truly it's just that their education isn't being presented to them in their native language, right? Because if you think about it, when your English is your second language, you're always hearing information in your native language first. And then
I've also seen situations where parents are coming in and they can't talk to the teacher. So the child is the one that's translating what the teacher's communicating. And I can pretty much guarantee that kid is not telling that parent exactly what's going on.
Yeah, well, in terms of if a child has an IEP, and your child has special education services, we have translators at our meetings, for those parents. And that's an accommodation. We give translators when they request it. We have translators at the PTA meetings, at, any sort of school meeting where they may come, into a situation where they need to receive information. And in fact, I have, a handful of clients who are ESL clients and who the primary issue is they weren't getting the information that they were getting the information. They weren't getting
not in their
a way that they could understand it. And so they didn't even understand all that was happening for their child.
Yes.
So we worked that out as well. But sure, that is an issue.
So, and then on the other end of that as well, like you said, a lot of non-English speaking homes end up being overclassified. So once they're at that IEP process, you have the ones that are now wasting their time on clearing these kids from these IEPs because they're unnecessary.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily happen that quickly. But yeah, you can sort of, you start to see pretty fast what is an actual potential area of disability and what is really just a language barrier. And to some extent, while I don't want any particular classification to be over-identified, I would rather have that be the case and have them have extra support that maybe they don't need, that we can fade away or pull back, than have kids who desperately need support not get it.
But it also detracts from the ones that need the support.
Exactly. 100%.
And talking about like needing support, we're going to switch real quick. You have gone through all of this. So we're talking principal, teaching, autistic child, new world, going into law school, and a brain tumor.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So sometimes when when you're living your life and you just sort of live your life and you just deal with stuff as it comes, and
yes,
but then when you talk about it or you tell someone about it, you're like, wow, that's a lot.
Because it is a lot. This is yeah.
So what happened was back in, I had no symptoms, zero. I've never been someone to suffer from headaches. I've never been someone who was dizzy, anything like that. But I would say it was about 2019. My husband said to me, I said to him, "Can you turn the TV up?" We were watching some show. I said, "Can you turn the TV up? I can't hear it." He's like, I think you have an issue. Like, you might have wax in your ears or something, because you have needed to listen to the TV so much louder. It's weird, like just in the last 6 months. And so I was like, you're right. And I went to just the local hearing doctor because I thought I had wax in my ears. And it said, you have a unilateral hearing loss in your left ear. He said, and typically it's bilateral. And when I see a unilateral hearing loss, I like to send patients for an MRI just to, make sure nothing else is going on. So I went for an MRI thinking this was just a standard thing, and they found there's a tumor in my brain. Now, my tumor is called an acoustic neuroma, and so it is benign, and it's not cancerous, but if left untreated, it can become malignant over time. And so
on top of causing hearing loss.
Right,
Oh my goodness.
causing hearing loss and all these other things that can go wrong if you leave it, because these tumors grow. And what happens is, depending on where they are situated, they start to cause all sorts of things, like paralysis and, you name it, it can go wrong. And that's why it's really important. Now, sometimes you do a wait and see, and if it's a very small tumor. So I went and got 50,000 different opinions, obviously, but the timing was, I went to my the last sort of consult at Weill Cornell in Manhattan, and it was January of 2020, right before the
Wow. Oh my God.
and was that neurosurgeon who said, I think it needs to come out, and basically every surgeon had said that to me. There were some that said, oh, you could wait a year or whatever, but he said, and I would do it sooner rather than later. And
Now, was this prior to them shutting the hospitals down?
so my first surgery was scheduled for April of 2020, and it got canceled because of
COVID.
down. So I ended up having the surgery in July of 2020, which again was still crazy. Like, I live in Avon, Connecticut, so it takes typically like 3 hours to get into Manhattan. We would get in there under 2 hours because there were no cars on the road. And when we got into Manhattan, there was nobody there.
It was a ghost town during COVID. It was crazy.
So, and even in the hospital, if you were having major surgery, they had to create this like wing for us. Because I was in the hospital for, it was like 9 days. And
So now you're talking about having a condition, because I just want everybody to be clear, because I think that we don't give each other enough credit for what this is doing, how this is taking a toll on you. So now you have something that you've gotten numerous opinions on. It's now growing. You're now having to have it removed, which obviously you really didn't want to hear that, because the first 20 times you heard it, you might have done it. But now you're getting it removed in the midst of a pandemic that people are dying from, and you're having to go into a hospital where people are not coming out of.
right, exactly. It was
And with no family. So was family allowed to go with you?
really traumatic. Just my husband, and only for he was able to be there. My surgery was like 13 hours, so he was able to be there that day.
Wow.
But he couldn't stay over because the hotels weren't open.
No. So he had to go home. Oh my God. And then come back.
And he can only come for like a 2-hour window every day.
That's crazy.
It was. And so through the surgery, they couldn't get all of the tumor because it was so embedded in my facial nerve that it would have caused paralysis to get all of it. So they got as much as they could out. But and they told me this was a possibility. Everyone told me I lost all of my hearing in my left ear. So I'm completely deaf in my left ear, except for the fact that I have tinnitus in that ear. Again,
Oh, no.
like a phantom limb. Like, you can't hear in the ear, but I can hear the tinnitus constantly.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And what ended up happening after the surgery, right, they had to take the balance nerve out of the left side to access the tumor. So I was dizzy for like 2 years. I needed physical therapy to teach me how to walk again. I couldn't read without the world spinning. I needed vestibular therapy. It was a long and arduous recovery, I have to say. And about a year later, because you have to do follow-up MRIs every few months, brain MRIs every few months, the tumor that they left in was starting to grow. So I then had to go through a course of intensive radiation, which again was tough. It was really
Takes
difficult.
a toll on your body.
Hey, okay, and then let's throw in the child.
Put a mask on you and snap you into a table in order to get radiation into your brain. It's horrible.
And now, how's your son handling this too?
Well, so
Because this has to be hard for him to understand.
So my son is not just autistic, but he's intellectually disabled. So he doesn't have the ability to understand anything like that. And he doesn't even really understand the passage of time. So if I don't see him for a week or a month, it's the same to him.
Okay.
Okay, so
And actually, I don't mean to make light of the pandemic in any way, but Ryan actually kind of thrived in the pandemic because with his autism and sensory issues, the world was very quiet and still.
Oh, he was able to explore it.
Everywhere he went, it was easier for him to navigate and manage, and he didn't have a lot of expectations on him. And so he actually did, thank God, remarkably well. And the program
That's amazing.
keeping him busy and occupied during that time. But yeah, so as we sit here today, and I got bad headaches after the surgery, but as we sit here today, I'm much, much better.
Yay.
The radiation worked, and for now, the tumor is stable.
oh, it's
Um,
wonderful.
And
But you have to, how consistently do you have to keep an eye on it?
every 6 months, I have to go for a brain MRI. But I take, I have stuff to manage the headaches. The hearing's never coming back. So that's a whole different way of life too, because when you have single side deafness, your brain doesn't always register where sound is coming from. So it's not like a hearing aid's going to help because I have no hearing in that ear. So you just have to preserve the hearing that you do have and, navigate the world a little differently. I always joke, I put my husband on my left side.
Okay, so I get that joke because my my ex, he has hearing loss on one side because he had multiple surgeries when he was a child, and they just had to take out mastoids and stuff. So he has no ear canal and no eardrum. So when I snore like a fucking freight train. And when that happens, I know it's bad because he would move and start sleeping on the other side, so he couldn't hear me.
Right.
So it was like a blessing for him.
It's great. I always say to my husband, Roger, if I can hear you snoring, it's bad because if I'm sleeping with my good ear down, it's a problem. It's a problem. But I have a great, I have to say, I joke, but I have a great husband. I could not, he's really the one that supported me through all of that. And really in the midst of it, I started a law firm with my partner.
Why not?
Our law firm is Laviano and Gagne. Jen Laviano has been practicing this area of law for, we're the same age, right? So she went right through. So 25, 28 years. And I actually interned with her before I started law school.
Oh,
That's so cool.
So we've come full circle and just celebrated 2 years of the firm, and it's going really well. And
Congratulations.
I'm lucky because I wake up every day and my sole mission is to make things better for kids with disabilities and their families. And it's aligned with everything that I do. Every board that I sit on the board where my son is at CCARC. We have an agency in Connecticut called SEEK Connecticut, which is Special Education Equity for Kids in Connecticut. And it's comprised of attorneys and advocates who try to get legislation pushed.
That's amazing.
So recently we were able to get the age out. So kids who qualify, it used to be they would turn 22. And so if you turn 22 in October 10th, October 11th, you no longer got services for the school district. So now it's to June 30th, the end of the school year, that the child turns 22. Or we got a law passed that said teachers and staff members can't be retaliated against for advocating for a student at a PPT meeting. So your example of a teacher really advocating, before that law was passed, we saw retaliation. And listen, we still see it and hear about it because I don't think everybody in Connecticut is even aware of this law, educators. But we had to get it passed. It shouldn't have to be, right? But we know that there's always a meeting before a meeting. So that's the kind of work that See Connecticut does. So everything that I'm doing is sort of wrapped around trying to make things better for families that.
And I have to tell you, because we do not give each other enough credit, and I believe that each of us have our role in the world where we make it better. And kudos to you, because you didn't have to keep going. You faced so many obstacles that you could have just been like, you know what? I just want to live my life and enjoy what I have left and go on from there. But you didn't. And you are enjoying your life, but you're doing it in a way that, like, dude, you're making an impact, not just like on families, but the world, because we've talked about angels being around, and like, you may not realize it, but you're definitely an angel for these people and these kids and these families, because when they don't have those advocates, and I've been in that position and in that chair, because I don't understand what's wrong with my kid, and I don't know what you're saying to me, and I don't know what I'm allowed to do or not do, and what my role is, and how I can make things easier or better. And having someone by your side that goes, no, I got you. I understand this.
Yeah.
Dude, we all need that person. So thank you so much for being that. And having a child on the spectrum that's had to deal with all of these like issues with schools and stuff, there could not be enough of you.
Exactly.
But the help that what you're doing is so immense. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much for saying that. I know when I made the decision to go back to law school, I was 44 years old, and I think I said this to Tommy yesterday when we were chatting. I was like, I was afraid I was going to be like the weird old person chick wondering that everyone was like, nobody would talk to, because I went time. So my cohort were the ages of my children.
Yeah.
I thought, it's just, hopefully they just, I had all of that anxiety. I was like kind of backpack my first day, and I couldn't have been more wrong. My cohort was phenomenal. I made friends. Age doesn't matter in law school. Everyone sort of has like an even playing field, and made some lifelong friends. And as hard as law school was, I'm really grateful for that experience. But people thought I was crazy because and educators do make a difference, and you are making a difference in education.
Oh, absolutely.
I just knew at that time, like, if I didn't do it then, I never would. And so I'm really glad that I did, because I always say, like, I've been at every seat at the table. I finally feel like I'm in the right seat.
Yes, I love that.
And I feel like you understand that seat a little better because you were at the other seats of the table. So you kind of know where everyone's kind of coming from.
When I say to a client, listen, I know how stressed out you are before this IEP or PPT meeting, because literally once before I hired Andy, I passed out on my way into the PPT meeting because I was so anxious. I passed out like right before I rang the bell to get into the school. I just literally dropped. So I know the anxiety that goes along with, even when people have attorneys, although one of my favorite moments I will say is when I have a new client and I attend their first PPT with them, because it's such a relief to have somebody there with you. I can't even explain that. I remember the first PPT I went to with Andy. And one of the things that I do in my meetings, our office does, is we audio record all of our PPT meetings, which legally you're allowed to do. And my client didn't know that and had never done it before. But I also did sort of my speech about, we're going to be collaborative. We're not going to, I don't go in there and start scorching the earth. And we go into the PPT meeting, and I said, I'll record, on my phone, so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. I've got you. I've got this. And we get into the meeting, and there's literally, 18 people around.
Yes.
That's overwhelming.
And she takes out her phone and she announces to everyone, we're recording. And she presses the button and she slams the recorder on the table, and she sits back like this. Like, she was so happy, but she just couldn't get to that, I'm going to be collaborative place, because she was still so mad at everybody, and so, but it was and it was all I could not.
It can feel like you're being attacked. When you go in there with nobody and you sit at this table with these people that you feel like you did something wrong.
You start questioning your parenting and right by my child, because I feel like a bad parent right now. Like, I don't know what's going on.
Well, oftentimes teens, and I don't think they do this intentionally. Sometimes maybe they do, but most of the time I don't think it's intentional. But they make the parent feel like they know your kid better than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is nobody knows your kid better than you do. Nobody. And nobody can tell you, something then if you don't agree with it, better than, somebody at the school. And so that's very frustrating for families. So, and sometimes it's, very hard for families to come to terms with, a profound diagnosis. I mean, listen, I took my son, to as many providers as I could to change the profound autism label and the intellectual to see if, somebody would tell me something that I wanted to hear, because no parent wants to hear that their 3-year-old, has basically no hope of a normal life, and so you grieve, I grieved the loss of raising a quote unquote typical child. And so when I say to my clients, I truly get it, it's because I've lived it, I've experienced it, and it's something I think they really appreciate.
And that matters, because that's why you fight so hard, because you know what it's like to be on that other side. And you know what it's like to be on that other side.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You got all angles.
You've been the mom, you've been the teacher at the table, the principal at the table, the lawyer at the table.
Right.
You just weren't the student at the table.
Right. Right.
That's amazing. But you've had that student at the table. So that, and yes, there are so many people out there that, and that has a lot to do with like changing a little bit the perspective on how we look. So each diagnosis is different. Each spectrum-based child is different. Each need is different. Each IEP faces a different thing. It's not just autistic kids. There's so many different.
There's 13. So there's 13 categories that a child can be identified for an IEP. In Connecticut, we have actually 2 subcategories in addition to that, right? And so autism is just one of them,
And people don't realize that. And it's just because you get this IEP does not mean that you are less than or somehow unable to succeed at life.
Yeah. No, listen, we have a mental health crisis in our country, not just with adults, but with our kids. And there's a category on the IEP for emotional disability. And in fact, in Connecticut, that Group C Connecticut that I told you about, we got that it used to be called an emotional disturbance. My law partner led the charge to get that changed to an emotional disability, because words matter and it feels different to say an emotional disability. But for kids who have anxiety and depression and it's impacting, we see I get a lot of calls of my kiddos either at a psychiatric hospital or their school refusal, all of that. And, that can qualify a student to get support from the school district and support at school for their mental health.
And that's so important.
That is so important.
But I also want to point out another part that people tend to not pay attention to. Like you said, you had to grieve the loss of raising what people would consider a normal child. What the parent's going through with trying to figure out and navigate these things, trying to figure out their child. And I have ADHD. I am bipolar. I have all of these things that I have to face my own, and to constantly feel like I'm being attacked. It's overwhelming to constantly I would get CPS would show up at my house every 90 days on the dot. And I found out that it was my daughter's therapist at school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she would actually they started having people coming into my home. And and it was supposed to be for my daughter. So it was supposed to be for help for her. They were part of the respite program. And when she would start kind of having a tantrum or something, doing homework, and she just didn't want to do it, this woman would come over and kind of help either de-escalate her or try to come up with a game plan so that I wasn't doing it by myself. But then she would go to the school and she would have this same woman walking up to her and going, so, don't you go to their house, don't you? Is it clean? Well, what's the mom like? Does she give her kids baths? Wait, I thought we were here trying to figure out a way to help my child. If you need to know all of this information, you are more than welcome to ask me to my face, and I can bring you into my home. But the backhanded, sneaky stuff, I'm not really sure where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, school personnel are what are called mandated reporters. So if there is something that presents and they have a question about, they are...
That's not what she was doing.
But right. And so, but what you're describing is sort of looking for, some information that probably...
She was making the calls from her home.
Yeah.
Because she was told by the school, because I went into the school and let them know that... Hold on, my mic's doing something weird. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I let them know that I was aware what was going on and that I would file a formal investigation against them, the school, with CPS to find out why all of these reports kept happening, because I knew that they were coming from the same place.
But
they stopped.
That example is why the trust breaks down between the school district and the family, right? And so that's just one of so many examples that I hear every single day of a way that could have been handled so much differently. And because of the way they chose to handle it, now you will never trust that school or that school district again.
I knew all the CPS people by name.
Yeah. There's no coming back from that, right? And so when I get involved in cases like that, the best I can do is just make sure we keep our focus on the child and making sure the child's getting the support and services. But I get it. Like you're never going to come back from that. It's almost impossible for them to earn your trust back from a situation like that.
Yeah, but I just want people to recognize what the parents also go through and know that these issues do happen. And they happen across the board, unfortunately. Some are very good. Like I said, there was a teacher that advocated for her very strongly. She ended up with a 1-with-1. She had an IEP. She refused to say okay to what everybody else, because they basically just wanted to kind of like get rid of her. They were like, oh, we got a different school she could go to. And she's like, nope, she needs NAID. That's it. She can stay here. She needs a 1-with-1. And that's what they did. And she had one all the way until she got to high school.
So when you say 1-to-1, just so people who may not know what that is, a 1-to-1 means there's some sort of a paraprofessional or a behavior person that, spends the day with the child. And when a child gets that, we try to make sure that's memorialized in the IEP, that there's a dedicated staff member, for that child. And sometimes, we always try to fade away from that. When kids demonstrate more independence, especially as they get older, they hate the 1-to-1. They can hate the 1-to-1. Right?
She did, and they did keep trying to fade it away. And she finally ended up in a school with her father where he's the principal. So by her mid-junior year, they did get rid of the 1-with-1 and just kind of they had someone there just in case, but it was more like a teacher's assistant.
Yeah. Like
for the classroom as opposed to the 1-with-1.
Yeah.
And but it did, every time they tried to like get rid of it, she was also a runner. She ran out of school, she climbed in the tree, wouldn't get down. They've had to send like search police dogs for her, trying to find her. So it was just it's an interesting journey we take.
Yeah. It's a lot. I know a lot of parents, when they see that their phone and they see the school calling or it's the school.
I've cried.
Yeah, your stomach sinks. I still get, when I have a call from my son's day program, I know something's wrong. And he's 28 and I see the number in my stomach. I still get the knot in my stomach. It's a lifelong journey. And it's something that unless you are going through it or have gone through it, you don't fully understand it to the same extent. You can try, you can be nice, you can be an ally, you can be a friend, you can be supportive, but you don't, quote unquote, get it the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But you are getting people to get it, and you're getting them to realize that there's help, and you're getting it for their children. And that is awesome.
I know.
And you still did all of this with all the crap you went through. So, and okay, so I got to rag on you for a second.
Okay. Do it. Me? You gonna run
Really?
it?
Yes, Melissa.
Bring it. I'm a Jersey girl. I can handle
Boston.
it.
Boston.
Oh,
Really?
yeah. I went to college at the Boston Conservatory. So that's why I was there at the time. But yeah, my undergraduate degree is actually in musical theater. I wanted to be on Broadway. I think Tommy will remember I spent as much time as I could in high school singing and in choir.
That's amazing.
And yeah. So I was fortunate enough when I was there to be able to sing the national anthem at a Red Sox game. That was
That's got to be like an incredible feeling.
It was great. And I was just saying before we started, I actually sang the national anthem at my law school graduation.
That's so cool.
Really cool.
It was really very special.
So how did your hearing loss, has that affected your singing at all?
Yeah. So I really, again, I'm pretty immersed in this work now. So it's not like I have a lot of time to sing and that it's impacting, I sing a little bit, in my car. I play a little bit of piano at home and sing sometimes. But yeah, what impacts it is the tinnitus more than
Okay.
constantly hearing the tinnitus, especially, there's times where you don't notice it, but there's times where it's really pronounced and profound. And when I'm trying to sing, it's there and it's loud and it's distracting and can be tough.
But like everything else, Melissa just keeps going. Like you said, you got caught up in your life before. You don't take a step back to say, wow, I did all this stuff. But it's pretty remarkable. I know you've had a lot of things that happened to you. I know you lost your mom when you were young. I know, you had your diagnosis of your son, Ryan. And then a doctor says to you,
Maybe that's where your need, that's where that passion comes from, because you lost your mom when you were so young. You've basically gotten a whole shit ton of kids now.
Yeah, you're just
like your mom to a bunch of people.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But yes, and then a doctor says to you, you have a brain tumor. But you didn't at once ever say, why me? And that's amazing. You kept going. And like Audrey said earlier, we had a show early on in the run of this podcast, a woman who said there are angels everywhere. And Audrey mentioned that earlier. And yeah, Melissa, you're living that. You're doing that. So
yeah, you're a walking angel.
You are.
Proud to say we're friends because you're doing amazing work.
Thank you so much. I do want to be honest and say there have been times along my journey with Ryan and when my mom died very suddenly and when I got diagnosed with the brain tumor where I definitely wallowed and said, this isn't fair, enough.
Because you're human.
I've definitely had, those experiences and those moments and those times where that's happened. But I think it's just in my nature to just sort of the only way out of that is through it. So I do it, I wallow, I feel it, and then I move past it and say, okay, what's next?
That's the most important thing is to actually you do have to feel it to go through it and understand what your feelings are, but to be able to move past it and do something positive with yourself. That's I think so important.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
With their Red Sox, can you just explain
Audrey's a
who they
diehard
played that day?
She's a diehard Yankee fan, diehard Ranger fan, diehard Knicks fan, and the Jets too, right?
It's so funny. I don't even remember who they played. I was in that I was in my boy crazy era, and I was so excited to be around so many attractive men at one time that I got totally distracted by that because I think I maybe 19 or 20. I mean, I was that young and the men were just and everyone was so nice. And so I was so overwhelmed by the whole experience that I don't actually remember a lot of it. I remember the dress that I wore. I remember the blue dress that I wore. And there are pieces of it I remember, but I don't actually remember the experience because it was so overwhelming.
Oh,
amazing. I don't remember who they were playing.
Dang it.
I just remember just surrounded by, baseball players. And I was like, wow.
I mean, if they were cute, then they had to be Yankees because a lot of them are ugly out there.
All just, cute and nice. And it was an incredible experience. And it's always one of those, conversation pieces, like when
Yes.
you did it, right? Like it was pretty cool to say you did it. I just don't necessarily remember a lot of it. It was long, and I was just so like overwhelmed at the time.
Well, that was your Broadway moment.
Yeah, that was
See,
My 15 minutes.
I have this thing with like Tommy that I like to fuck with him about.
How so?
It's about when you make your dreams, when you wish about what it is that you want in your future, to make sure that you're a little bit more specific. So your Broadway journey ended up leading you to.
So technically, one of my dreams came true this year. Melissa, I was at a Ranger game, and as you know, I'm a big hockey fan, big Ranger fan. So I was at a game, and I was walking through the halls of Madison Square Garden, and I was like, "Holy shit!" There's a poster. I'm like, "That's me," and it's me and Jeff Carabin, who you know, at a Ranger game, getting an autograph from one of the players, and it's been on the wall for like 40 years in this poster at Madison Square Garden. I was like, "This is incredible! I made it to the walls of Madison Square Garden." Not the way I wanted it, but it was still. It's kind of a
See, he wasn't specific enough.
But
His
you
dream was to be on the walls.
yes.
But I have to say, one, I remember Tommy wearing Rangers jerseys all the time. Like, I remember that back in the day. But two, I saw that post.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Book, and I saw that, and I remember looking at that post and thinking, that's amazing, because I remember that about you and how passionate you were about it.
It's super cool. 40 years old.
It is amazing. It is awesome. I love his face, how it lights up every time he walks past it.
Pretty cool.
And he makes sure to let everybody know that's me.
I'm like, right there.
That's me.
Got it. So,
I get it. That's incredible. I love that.
so yes, the dreams come true in some ways sometimes.
do come true.
They do come true. Especially when you find your passion.
Yeah, that's important.
And Melissa found hers, and you're like Audrey and Jen said, you're helping people, and that's incredible because people, everyone here has been in those meetings, you know, and you said it several times how scary they can be.
They are.
And yeah, and thanks for being there. You know, when I was having an issue, we were having an issue, Christina and I, with one of our kids, our mutual friend Kathy Moran was like, "Call Melissa." She said, "Call Melissa. That's who you got to talk to." So, yeah, keep doing this awesome work. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I know you've helped me. I'm writing notes for Kylie, but then you were touching on some other stuff about the emotional disability and anxiety. And I was like, oh, my son Jack's, like, we're having issues with him. So I'm like, dude, you got me at every angle. I'm like, this is awesome.
Okay, I'm so glad.
Yeah, I can't.
Part of my journey, too, that I like to talk about when I do talk to parents is just if you're ever feeling like you're stuck in a career or on a path. Like, my story isn't like I hated education, so I left. It wasn't that story. It wasn't that I hated what I was doing at all. It's just there's a part of me that must have felt called to some extent, and I felt like it was like, I have to do this now. And so I just like to try to encourage people, like, do it. Go to law school at 44 years old. Like, even if you are the weird old person, like, but that's what you really feel like you're supposed to be doing. You know, do it. It's sacrifices that have to be made. And it was hard and it was a slog. And I told Tommy, studying for the bar exam was a horrific experience. And I said, if I pass this test, I'm never taking another test as long as I will. And by that, but I'm so glad I did it. And so I think sometimes, you know, even though people were like, why would you leave this successful? I was on a trajectory to become a superintendent. Like, why would you leave this successful career to totally start over, become an intern? And, you know, and there were times during it where I was like, you know, I did have a good thing going. Like, what am I thinking? But I'm so glad that it just kept going. And now I really love what I'm doing. I love the work. I love helping. Again, I wake up every day and like, that's my mission. And some days I'm better at it than others. And some day it goes better than others, but you just sort of, the days it doesn't go great, you just start over the next day and you try again. And so I finally am like in something that I could see myself doing, you know, forever.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That is really great.
Yeah. And thanks so much for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, no, it was amazing talking to you. I definitely got a lot of information that I needed and didn't know I needed as well. So I thank you for that.
It was really fun. It was great. First of all, Tom, it's so great to see you and see you doing so well. And
same here.
Your family and everything, and to reconnect. That's been really special. And Jen, it was so great to meet you, and Audrey also. And this was really fun.
Well, Melissa, thank you for coming to our Hot Mess Wednesday show.
It was so great.
so much about you, and we are so appreciative of you, obviously. Thank you for bearing with us and through all the chaos. And if
Wednesday is the day everything goes sideways. It's just
It definitely.
I feel like I'm like straight up perpendicular to the floor at this point. But,
We're a little all over the place, but it happens sometimes.
how can people reach you?
So in multiple ways. So I'm attorney Melissa Gagne on Instagram and TikTok. And our website for my law firm is just www.lavianoandgagne.com. So Laviano is L-A-V like Victor, I-A-N-O. So it's www.lavianoandgagne.com. And that's a website for our law firm. And our law firm phone number is 860-350-4757. So if you live in Connecticut and you think you might need help, you can give us a call and we'll set up a free consult.
Definitely reach out to Melissa.
Yes, definitely.
And everybody, there are ways for you guys to get help.
Yes.
Yeah, and
So many ways.
Instagram and the TikTok, I share that because I do post those videos, like I said, but I want to manage your expectations. Like I said, they're not professional videos. Literally me with a ring light that I got for $20 on Amazon, going on for like a minute or a minute and a half and going through like a specific topic, like end of year field trips, making sure your child's included and all of that.
That's cool.
But these are all things that people need to know. And like, it's good to have, like, even though it's not legal advice, it's just, you know what? This is kind of how you can maneuver these issues. Always.
I always do like tips for your next IEP meeting, tips for back to school, all those kinds of things. And I do these little, like I said, they're very rudimentary videos, but I think people find them helpful.
Awesome.
I agree.
Oh my God, of course.
I agree. And I thank you for that.
Thanks for joining us, Melissa.
Apparently, it fills our dopamine need by filming these TikToks. So you're giving us knowledge and you're helping the ADHD people focus on something.
Yeah.
15 seconds.
There you go. I never thought about that, but I want that.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
1, 2, 3, 42.
Rule 42 is hosted by Audrey Cruz and Jen Burke. It is produced and edited by Tom Smith. The opening song is Rule 42 by Eddie Carr. Rule 42's artwork was created by Aubrey Cruz. And I'm your announcer, Molly Smith. Thank you for listening to Rule 42. We hope you enjoyed the show. New episodes premiere every Thursday on all podcast platforms. Please subscribe, share the show, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple.